once again, we'll turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 4. Again, Solomon is observing some things, some matters. He's relating his personal observations and even his personal experiences concerning a life lived apart from God. Whether that's a life that can be seen with the physical eye, or perhaps just mentally. But he observes some consequences of such, and we've seen thus far that they're extremes. He moves from one extreme to another. We began last week looking at verses 7 through 12, and he has moved from slothfulness to what we will call selfish ambition. He's moved from laziness to the workaholic. Workaholic is looked at as an attribute in our society many times, but I suppose it's better than laziness, but it may cost you just as much as laziness. So he, again, apart from God, is one extreme to another. And extremes usually don't work. We see in verse 8, he presents to us an individual. He says in verse 7, "Then I returned and I saw vanity under the sun." So he's getting ready to make another observation. And again, this observation is vanity. "There is one alone, and there is not a second. Yea, he hath neither child nor brother. Yet is there no end of all his labor." He doesn't have anyone depending upon him, but there's no end of his labor. He explains this, the reason for this. "Neither is his eye satisfied with riches. Neither saith he, For whom do I labor, and bereave my soul of good?" And he gives the summary. "This is also vanity. Yea, it is a sore travail." Then he moves on to some of the consequences of this lifestyle. So he paints a picture of a particular individual. This individual is lonely because of the lifestyle that he or she has chosen. They're greedy. That's the reason for the lifestyle. They find no joy in life. They don't have time for it, or anyone to share their attainments with. He says there's one alone. There's not a second. He's all by himself. "Yea, he hath neither child nor brother, yet there is no end of all his labor." Then he says, "Neither is his eye satisfied with riches." And that's where we stopped last week. Neither is his eye satisfied with riches. It's not neither is he satisfied with riches. That's true, but it's neither is his eye. That is, in his eye and his mind, there's always a reason. There's always a reason to work, work, work. It is, notice in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 8, All things are full of labor. Man cannot utter it. Then notice, the eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. There's a dissatisfaction. Chapter 5, verse 10. He that loveth silver shall not be satisfied with silver, or he that loveth abundance with increase. This is also vanity, emptiness. Chasing the wind is probably the best picture. Ecclesiastes 6, verse 7. All the labor of man is for his mouth, yet the appetite, that would correspond to the eye in this case, the desire, the appetite is not filled. There's always more. There's always more. Well, when we get to this point, we'll stop. But you won't, because of the nature of man, because of the appetite of man. In Isaiah 55, Isaiah 55, verse 2. Wherefore do you spend money for that which is not bread? In other words, you waste. You waste. And your labor for that which satisfieth not. Hearken diligently unto me, and eat ye that which is good, and let your soul delight itself in fatness. Let it delight itself in what is attained. In Isaiah 65, Isaiah 65, verse 13. Therefore thus saith the Lord God, Behold, my servants shall eat, but ye shall be hungry. Behold, my servants shall drink, but ye shall be thirsty. The appetite's always in motion. Behold, my servants shall rejoice, but ye shall be ashamed. It's also what Jesus told the woman at the well. Notice in John chapter 4. John chapter 4, verse 13. Jesus answered and said unto her, Whosoever drinketh of this water, the water from the well, shall thirst again. Doesn't satisfy. Nothing wrong with the water in the well. It's something that's needed. But you better know that it does not bring lasting satisfaction. And that's what Jesus is telling her. So the individual pictured here in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, he's ambitious. That's good. It's a good thing. But it's an ambition fed by pride. That's a dangerous thing. It is an ambition fed by desire for the temporal. It's ambition fed by personal glory, personal satisfaction. So again, ambition, we look at it as a good thing. But really it comes down to what feeds the ambition. Why is the person ambitious? Why? To what extent are they going to take it? So in this case, it's a selfish ambition that prioritizes personal achievement, personal gain, personal recognition over all else. This is over all else, the picture of verse 8, including meaningful relationships, How many marriages have been destroyed because of this ambition? It's placed above relationships. And they'll always come up with a good reason for doing so in their mind. That's human nature. But this individual never stops to consider and examine what they're doing with their life. They're too busy. They're too busy to stop and consider what is actually happening. Notice there in Ecclesiastes 4 and verse 8, neither saith he, for whom do I labor? Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? And more importantly, and bereave my soul of good. Never stops and considers his soul. So caught up in it, so entrapped in this cycle that he doesn't stop and consider his soul. So longs for whatever, prestige and advancement, that they neglect and rob their soul. Again, they'll always justify it. Well, I have to. No, you don't. Well, I have to. And they justify it and they convince themselves. It's what Jesus rebuked. Notice in Matthew 16. Matthew 16, verse 26. The Lord just asks two questions here. He asks questions for the purpose of making a point, the purpose of bringing about conviction. This is in the context of being a disciple. He says, for what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Profit. Profit. That's something we'd better understand. What is profit? It's over and above what it cost you. Well, if it cost your soul, there's nothing over and above that, so it can't be a profit. The soul here would be equivalent to the spiritual. If it cost you your spiritual life, it's not profit. That's loss. He then goes on, or what shall a man give in exchange? Okay, that's buying and selling. We need to understand what it is to buy and what it is we're selling. What shall a man give in exchange for his soul? Again, what he is asking here is in the context of being a true disciple of the Lord. He says, notice verse 24 and 25, Then said Jesus unto his disciples, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself. In order to properly see the difference between soul and temporal, we have to deny self. We have to get self out of the way. And take up his cross and follow me. For whosoever will save his life, what we save, whosoever will save his life shall lose it. That is, if you put your life ahead of the spiritual, you'll lose it. And whosoever will lose his life for my sake shall find it. Now that's profit. That's profit. The one is loss. The one is profit. So what he's declaring here, a truth that most of God's people have never gotten. Spiritual loss is of greater consequence than material gain. It doesn't matter what the material gain is. Spiritual loss is of greater consequence than whatever is gained. And this man in verse 8, neither saith he, whom do I labor and bereave my soul of good. So, the one mentioned here in Ecclesiastes, he's caught in this cycle of selfish ambition. He never stops to consider the deprivation of soul that he's bringing upon himself. There's a failure to count the cost. If you fail to count cost, then how do you determine? You can't determine profit. They have to come together. So there's a failure to count cost. Cost, and again, we need to learn this in all areas of life. Most don't. We need to especially learn it in the spiritual realm. Cost is the amount paid for something. Very simple. It's the expenditure put forth to obtain or achieve something. In order to properly count the cost, regardless of what it is, it could be a shirt. We're talking in the spiritual realm. One must be able to determine value. And there's a difference. Cost and value are not equivalent. There's a difference, and we need to know the difference between cost and value. That's true in the physical realm. It's even more so in the spiritual. Cost and value. Value is what something is worth to me. If I see a shirt that costs $30, that shirt must have more value to me than the $30. If that shirt does not have more value to me than the $30, guess what? I'm not buying the shirt. I'm not doing it. So we distinguish between cost and value. That needs to be carried over into the spiritual realm. So, value is worth. In Matthew 16, Jesus is teaching that the cost of being a true disciple is total surrender. That's the cost. That's what Jesus is laying out in Matthew 16. Someone says, well, I want to be a disciple. And Jesus says, okay, this is what it costs. Are you willing to pay that? Most, if they're honest, would have to say, absolutely not. I'm not willing to pay that. The cost is to deny self. The cost is total surrender. The cost is total commitment. And the value of that is a right relationship with Him. This is what it costs. Here's the value. A right relationship with Him. So in this case, the question is, Is Jesus worth the cost of discipleship? That's what Jesus is asking. Is Jesus worth what it's going to cost? Or it can be turned around. Is what is gained in the temporal worth the cost of the spiritual? We need to ask ourselves that question. Is what is gained in the temporal, is it worth the cost? Is it worth the cost? We think that through, or some people do, not everybody. When you go into a store and shop, you think cost and value. That needs to be carried over into the spiritual realm. In this case, in Ecclesiastes 4, his selfish ambition cost him relationships, and that's what he emphasizes through verse 12. It costs us individual relationships. Is it worth it? Well, that's what you have to determine. Is it worth it? So, it all comes down to where one places the most value. Where one places the most value. I may see, in the physical realm, I may see value in something that you see absolutely no value in, vice versa. But regardless, it all comes down to what we value. A necklace for myself, it has no value. I'm not interested. I'm not interested. Not whatsoever. Not interested. All comes down to what's valuable to us. What do we notice in Matthew 6 again? Matthew 6. Again, we've preached from these verses many times, and no one is going to live for the Lord until they get these two things straight. Matthew 6, verse 19 and 20. Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. So, there's a contrast here between earth and heaven. And it all comes down to this. What do we consider to be of more worth? Earth or heaven? Where do we place the most value? Which is what we treasure. Lay not up for yourselves treasures. Lay up for yourself treasure. So it's what we treasure. Where we place value, what we treasure, is what we're willing to pay the most for. That's what we're willing to pay the most for. In Matthew 6, verse 19 and 20, earth and heaven, you can view them as price and value. If one places more value in the earthly than the spiritual, then they are willing to sacrifice the spiritual for the earthly. They're willing to pay that price. Again, it all depends where you see value. And where one places the most value in if they place more value in the spiritual than the earthly, then they're willing to sacrifice the earthly for the spiritual. It's price and value. We have to learn that lesson. The one presented in Ecclesiastes 4:8 has not learned that lesson. Not only hasn't learned it, he doesn't even consider it. He doesn't even take time to think about it. Satan is very good at causing us to be confused about price and value. Way back in the early 80s, I worked with a furniture liquidator. He was from New York. He traveled all over the country to run furniture liquidation sales. And I worked with him. I remember all the salespeople, they got all the stuff, organized on the floor, getting everything ready. And he came in and he says, "No, you've wasted all your time. We need to create chaos. We need to create chaos." And he had things scattered everywhere. Just a mess. You couldn't even hardly walk between. Need to create chaos. Chaos causes people to turn their brains off and not to consider price. And I watched them. And people paid more during liquidation sales. That's why liquidation sales go on for years and years. They paid more than what they would have before the liquidation. But chaos has been created. I got to get this before he gets it. This is a bargain. It says right there, 70% off. 70% off of what? You don't stop and consider that. There's no distinction between price and value. And that's how it is. If you get caught in this cycle of selfish ambition, they never stop and consider the deprivation of soul. I've had so many people get upset with me when I say, and I've said it a million times, the spiritual is always worth more than the physical. And the spiritual is always more important than the physical. People don't believe that. They don't believe that, and they get upset about it. But it's true. It's true. You need to see the difference between price and value. Caught in this selfish ambition, this individual does not even consider, what is this costing me? What does it cost me? I just got to have it. Doesn't matter what it costs. Just got to have it. There's a failure to consider the deeper and more meaningful matters of life. What value is what we consider to be of the most worth. It is what we consider to be most useful to us. What is most benefit to us? Again, Satan likes to create chaos. Turn your brains off. I got to do this. I got to. I don't have any choice. Slow down. Don't fall into the trap of created chaos. Satan's an expert at it. No one does it better than Satan, creating chaos. The brain shuts off. Common sense goes out the window. And they think they're doing the right thing. They're caught. They're trapped. Paul's solution, Colossians 3, verse 2. He says, set. That is, position situate, and establish. You set something, you do it on purpose. You never set something on accident. You set something, it's on purpose. It's with an intention. Set your affections. That's what sees value. Affections is our love, that which we are endeared to, that which we're attached to. Be careful what you become attached to. Be careful. Set your affection on things above, not on the things on the earth, implying it can't be in both places. You do one or the other. The importance and significance of that is seen in the fact that we will move in the direction of, and we will be brought to, and we will focus upon, and we will have eagerness and passion for, and be dedicated to wherever our affections are, wherever we have set our affections. In verse 1, he mentions seeking those things which are above. What we set our affections on determines what we seek. So this is of the utmost importance. And what we set our affections on is where we see value, where we see the most value. And that determines our pursuit in life. All these things work together. It's not rocket science. It's not confusion. It's not that complicated. They all work together. Our affections determine our pursuits. You don't pursue something you can't stand. You pursue what you desire. You pursue what you are attached, where you're attached. So again, it comes down to, it all gets back to value. Where do we see value? The most value. And if you have problem, you say, well, I can see value in the temporal here. There's value there, and there may be. But there's value here too. Get back to the same old truth. If you see value in both, it's causing confusion. The spiritual is always more valuable than the temporal. It's that simple. No need to be confused. No need whatsoever. We just need to be settled on these things. So Solomon draws this picture in verse 8 of this man. And then he says, okay, he's in this cycle of what we'll call selfish ambition. He says this is also, in addition to all the other things he's mentioned, this is also vanity. It's empty. Because it cost him more than what he expends. It's empty. It's a chasing after the wind. If you saw somebody running up and down the sidewalk out here and you said, what are you doing? You've been running up and down here for hours. What are you doing? I'm chasing the wind. You'd say, that person's lost his mind. Look around. That's what the whole world's doing. They're chasing the wind. They're never going to catch it. And even if they could, they wouldn't know what to do with it. This is also vanity. Yea, a word of emphasis. It is a sore, that is painful, distressful, agonizing travail, labor and toil. Again, Solomon began this chapter speaking of the fact of oppression. Life is oppressive. And we add to it when we try to live life apart from God. We add to the oppressiveness of life. Life is so hard. Nothing's ever easy for me. Well, maybe you need to stop and look at what you're doing. Because I would guess you're bringing more and more and more difficulty into your life by just living apart from God. That's what people do. That's our nature. We need to be aware. That is our nature. God's people would not fall into the traps that they fall into if they realized my nature, our nature. This is what we will do apart from God. So God help us. Let's look to the Lord. Heavenly Father, again,